Okay, welcome. I'm Edwin Rutsch, Director of the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and I'm here today with Matt Delaney. Matt had written an article titled The Misuses of Empathy and Devaluing Pain in the magazine Quillette, and that's what we want to talk about. But maybe we can start with just an introduction of who you are, and we can jump into the article.
Yes, so I'm a news editor and reporter for the Falls Church News Press. It's a local newspaper in the Washington, D.C. metro area.
Great.
Yeah, like I said, other than that, that's all you need to know, you know?
Yeah, simple. So as I was mentioning, we started recording before, but the audio kind of crapped out on us. I have been working for about 12 years on the topic of empathy, saying that we need to create a culture that's really based in empathy, that make empathy a primary social value. And I try to reach out to people who are writing about empathy or are critical of it and engage in, sort of a dialogue just to hear where they are and kind of kick around ideas and so forth. So maybe we could start with, how you came about writing this article, where the idea came from, and just jump into it.
Yeah, so I think the primary thing I noticed is that there's always been, occasionally, almost seasonally, there will be an article saying, oh, there's a crisis of empathy, or we need empathy, with so on and so forth. And it's usually in a political realm that it's being addressed. It's in political realms, obviously, a really big picture. You know what I mean? You're asking large swaths of the population to empathize with a given issue, sometimes one person. And I've, kind of looked at that and I'm like, I don't know, and it seemed kind of odd because empathy to me has always been a very personal emotion. And I think I laid that out in the article as well, where it's like, hey, usually this is something we reserve for intimate relationships. We don't go around empathizing with strangers. So I felt it was kind of a weird approach. And I have some kind of grander metaphysical thoughts about why we are being kind of prodded to use our empathetic muscles more, but I'm not gonna bore you with that unless you do want to hear it. But I kind of looked into it more and more, and I was like, I really feel like it's being used. These people are just co-opting pain. These people as in politicians specifically, and sometimes people who are trying to have their political worldview realized in the actual reality that we live in. They're co-opting other people's pain, and they're saying, hey, we need you to empathize with this so we can accomplish this mission. And, it was something I was stewing on for a long time before I finally, kind of sorted out the word salad in my head and actually made it into a meal. So, yeah, I mean, that's the long and short of it right there.
Okay. So if I'm getting it, then there's like politicians are sort of identifying people's pain and sort of using that for their own ends or something along those lines? Is that what you're...
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's not a unique thing. Politicians have always done that, right? But I guess the methods of communication haven't been as instantaneous, where I feel like our brains now are trained due to social media, due to, 24-hour news cycles. We're just bombarded with pain all the time. Obviously, because like the old news line, it bleeds, it leads, right? So we're seeing all this catastrophe all the time, and politicians are seizing on that kind of shock value that comes out and saying, we need to do something right away. And they're kind of drawing a battle line there. It's like, well, if you don't feel the way I feel about this and the way me and my people feel about it, then you're part of the problem, and I found that's disingenuous because, like I said before, to really empathize with someone, you need to understand them. You know what I mean? People aren't even taking the time to understand the issue. They're just looking for a means to an end. And they're also using it to kind of attack other people as well, it's becoming this weird double-edged sword that I don't think is healthy at all for our culture, especially now, given the way it is.
Okay, well, I think one problem is that there's people sort of define empathy differently, and it gets kind of very muddled in terms of what are we even talking about? We may be talking about two different, phenomenon, and, that might come down to the academics a lot, just not being able to get their act together and have clear definitions. So it might be good to kind of hone in on what we're even talking about when we talk about empathy. What is the actual phenomenon? for example, for me, empathy is feeling into someone else's situation, their life. So if I'm sitting here, I'm seeing you, I can feel sort of who you are. I can feel your concentration, your presence. You're shaking your head a little bit in acknowledgement. Like I know, oh, you're hearing me. You're probably understanding me. So I can sort of sense into who you are, sort of your felt experience, and likewise, you're seeing me wave my hands. You can maybe feel a sense of the level of energy that I have, or how my mind is working. So we sense into each other's experience, and so that's sort of like the first level of empathy. I can have self-empathy where I can feel into myself. I can feel my own felt experience. What am I feeling in my body? Getting a little maybe expand, create a little bit of space. So I'm sensing that, so that self-empathy, then empathizing with others. And the empathy is not just seeing you with your pain. I mean, I'm seeing you with your pleasure, with your joy, with maybe some pain, maybe, the full range of experience that you have. So I'm sort of sensing into that. So at least that's the first step part that I see of empathy.
Yeah, I actually watched your interview with Fritz.
Fritz Breitkopf.
Yeah, and I agree with what you were talking about with I can't remember. Was it Paul Bloom?
Paul Bloom, right?
Yeah, I don't agree that empathy is state matching as you used it. You know what I mean? I don't think we have to mirror each other's emotional state all the time. You know what I mean? Kind of like how you put it. We need to be able to understand where another person is coming from, even if we don't necessarily feel that ourselves. But we're also talking to, this is a one-on-one interaction. And also like how you talked to Fritz at the end of that conversation, where I know he questioned whether empathy was scalable, where you brought up that example of you kind of dispelling a conflict between your sister-in-law and your mom. And I was like, yeah, I have the same question where I'm not sure if it is scalable, because it does take a deep level of understanding of a person to really kind of see all the nuances of the emotion, to be like, hey, I totally get where you're coming from, but I'm just going to let you know you're wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I know why you feel this way, but you're wrong. I know that was really vague and abstract, but I'm just just throwing that out there.
No, you're saying that you see empathy at a personal level, and you're wondering if it scales to a societal level. Yeah, and that you might be able to understand someone else and what's going on for them, but you don't agree with it. And when you're saying you're wrong, you're making a judgment, though. I mean, you're saying that I don't agree with you is a little bit different from saying you're wrong, right? It's like right and wrong is sort of a moral judgment. Yeah, so there's a judgment, and actually judgment blocks empathy. So like if you're, instead of hearing someone, you say you're wrong or you're right, that stops. That's actually one of the major blocks to really hearing and understanding someone is that judgment.
So I guess I would ask you in response is, what do you think the goal of being empathetic is? I mean, first, I guess, do you agree that there is an objective right and wrong that can come about from any kind of confrontation? And if empathy can help sort that out, I mean, can you soften the blow of someone being, quote unquote, wrong by being empathetic, if you do think there is a right and wrong in a situation?
Yeah, I don't kind of focus on the right and wrong of it. So we do, like, I've been trying to, I don't know if you saw any of the other stuff we do, like with this empathy tent. We have this tent, we go out to, like here where I am in Berkeley, the political right, you've maybe seen
the rallies, yeah.
They come to the rallies, and then there's counter rallies with Antifa, and it's a bloodbath. I mean, and we actually set up the empathy tent in the middle of it, right? And we're sitting there, we're saying we're willing to listen to both sides, and so the empathy that I see is I'm willing to listen to the right. Here, sit down, listen to what you have to say, do kind of empathic listening to have people feel like they're heard and understood, and then do the same for the other side. And then the second part is to bring the sides together to dialogue with each other in an empathic dialogue. And so I'm not saying, hey, the right, you're wrong, you're racist, you're misogynistic, you're all this. And Antifa, I'm not here to say you guys are communists, or I don't know what all the different all the criticisms that you're not scum or whatever, the type of criticism. I'm not here to judge either side in terms of the right and wrongness. I'm here to create a dialogue. And through that dialogue, it's an integrative process. So that's one thing, is empathy is often seen as sort of this individualistic thing. I, as an individual, empathize, or versus that there's a culture where in relationships, and what's the level of empathy in the relationship, right? So when Antifa and the right are battling it out, there's kind of a low level of empathy in the overall relationship, and what can we do to raise it with everyone. So I guess I'm saying about the judgment, I'm not here to judge either side. I'm here for them to dialogue with each other, and it's an integrative process. It's like someone shares something, someone responds, and then there's sort of this back and forth. You start seeing your humanity that's behind the fight or the conflict.
Well, I guess in relation to my article, maybe that is the main problem with how empathy is used on a large scale, is that there is that judgment involved. And I know I had a brief paragraph in there where it's like, hey, when it comes to abortion, you either empathize with the unwilling mother or you empathize with the unborn child. When it comes to immigration, you either empathize with the person that, lost their job due to illegal immigrants coming, even though, there's data that's skeptical about that notion, or, you empathize with the migrant who came from a war-torn country or something like that and is looking for a better future for them and their family. And I think politicians seize on that judgment, that need for judgment, because ultimately people have to judge them at the ballot box. So they're kind of imposing that political will on us, or that political framework, even though, there's democracy and a republic and all that jazz that we we have to play ball that way. So I'm not trying to upset the system or anything like that, but it's, empathy, I think, is just the tool of the time. I don't think there's necessarily an innate problem with what empathy is. They've just kind of taken advantage of our culture that has become very well-to-do. We were probably the, most luxurious culture, you could say, in the history of modern times. And because we're so removed from our survival needs, we're able to think about deeper psychological phenomenon more and more. And that's why we're able to tap into, these scientific studies that have come out, ethnic studies and feminism, whatnot. I've been outside of the United States in areas in the third world, and they're not thought of there because they're so grounded in the day-to-day and survival that they don't have, they don't have the luxury we have to really expand their mind and think about those kinds of things. So I think politicians saw an opening in that, and they're bolstered by, a media that's very hungry for, confrontational stories, and really social media, which feeds off anger as well. Even though that's not really an arm of the media per se, or the, the formal corporate media, but it's an arm of, the personalities from the media go on there, and I don't want to say they peddle things, but they definitely highlight what they feel will get more interaction and more engagement. And that's where I feel like empathy is really, it's a hostage in a sense. I don't think there's anything wrong with being empathetic, like I said, but it's being abused, you know what I mean? And it's really this muscle that we've developed over our evolution, like you talked about with Fritz, where it's an evolutionary trait where you learn to kind of stick with your, back in the day, your tribe and whatnot, and understand each other. Now that our tribes are so big and so diverse, it's being used to kind of create a boundary line. And I think I use the term emotional identity politics, and if I don't know your stance on identity politics, but I think it's a crapshoot, or a crappy ideology, way of going about things. So yeah, I feel empathy is being abused for political gain when it's not necessarily equipped for that right now. I guess that, that's my period point on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me see if I'm getting it. So you're saying that if there's sort of the abortion debate, so you're pro-life, pro-choice, that politicians are having people identify with one or the other and sort of using that, like, oh, you have to identify with this side, or you have to identify with this side, and that's sort of like dividing people. And you see that you're calling that empathy, like you're empathizing with the unborn child, or you're empathizing with the mother that's needing an abortion for whatever reason. So,
they use imagery to depict that too. They'll say, like, think of yourself as a single mother with 3 kids already, and you only make $40,000 a year, and you live in New York City. You know what I mean? It's like you can't afford another child. They create an empathetic image. Or when it comes to the political right, where they'll say, oh, well, that baby didn't ask to be conceived, and now you're just going to end its life for no reason. You know what I mean? What a selfish act that is. They're asking you to empathize with the child. So, they become descriptive with it to kind of hook you in with those empathetic, that empathetic kind of hook right there to pull people in.
Well, there's a couple of things there that I think empathy is very subtle, it's subtle, and, the culture doesn't understand it well. Mm-hmm. And there's things that block that empathic connection. So one thing that blocks empathy, I think, is sympathy. So if you're feeling sorry for one side or the other, that feeling sorry is actually a block to empathy. So in the therapeutic, realm, where there's been a lot of work done with empathy, that a therapist will listen to someone who's having some kind of a problem, and they would just follow along and be present and listen. But if you start sympathizing, you say, oh, I feel so sorry you're going through this issue. I'm so sorry for you that you're having these problems. When you feel sorry for someone, it starts being about you and your sadness and your sorrow for that person. So it's kind of
stop feeling sorry for them.
Yeah, and it's like, if you're not trying to solve that person's problem necessarily. You're trying to solve your problem of feeling the pain of your feeling sorry for them. So it's a very subtle different things. You're no longer being present with the person. The attention is on you.
Yeah, because self-centered. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually, so I guess what the criticisms you're making of empathy, I would say, are not actually criticism of empathy, but criticisms of things that are blocking empathy. And I think that's kind of a distinction I'd make. And the same thing with identification. If you're saying, oh, I had this problem, with my family or whatever, then I say, oh, I've had the same problem with my family, right? And then I start talking about me. I'm no longer present with you, sort of exploring the emotions and the feelings of your, whatever issue you have. I'm identifying with you and starting to talk about my problems. And that, again, is a block to that empathic presence. So that's the first part. The first part is that there's these things that are blocks to empathy, being present with others, that is not the problem with empathy, but are things that are blocking empathy. So, and empathy gets the rap of being the problem when it's not empathy being the problem, but the blocks. The second thing to solve that is, we do a weekly, we call it an empathy cafe online. So we bring the political left and the political right together to have these empathy circle dialogues using empathic listening. So we've done at least 3 of them on the abortion, this topic. And so we'll have people on the, abortion side, pro and anti, and they're just dialoguing with each other using this empathic listening. But if you have a kind of a structured empathic dialogue, the process we use is, one person will have small groups, 4 people, 2 from each side ideally. And then one person speaks, they select who they're going to speak to, and the listener reflects back what they hear the speaker say to the satisfaction of the speaker, right? That you have before it's your turn to speak, you have to be able to understand and reflect back to the satisfaction of the speaker what their point is, what their experience is. And then once, the time is up, we have 5-minute turns, or the person has nothing else to say, then it's the listener's turn to become the speaker, and they select someone else to speak to, and that person reflects back, and it goes around like that for a couple hours. And that is what I would call a culture of empathy. Like all the parties are listening to each other and hearing each other, and sort of this space opens up of mutual understanding and connection. And that's what I would call kind of a culture of empathy, where it's this mutual listening. And you could take that to any issue that you mentioned, be it the border, with immigration, that not only do we want the parties who are, for immigration or against or whatever, but we also want the people who are trying to immigrate or, the coming across illegally or whatever, to have empathy circles with them to discuss what the issue is. So people create a sense of deeper understanding and connection versus, kind of this polarization, this more and more polarized situation. So that's kind of the first. I mean, there's a lot more, but I just pause there if you have any.
No, I was just going to ask, is there a solution that you're looking for? I guess a kind of an endpoint that you want outside of just understanding each other?
Well, once people understand each other, they start seeing their common humanity, and that creates the foundation for shared action. That you have to have some kind of a foundation. For example, we've done this, like in Berkeley, we set up the empathy tent, and there was a right-wing rally, and there was some women there, some conservatives, and, we were sitting talking to them, and this Berkeley liberal woman came. She said, I never talked, I'm living in my Berkeley bubble, I said, well, here's some conservatives, and two of them got together, and they started talking, I facilitated it, kept them on track, because they would kind of get triggered and, want to lash out. And I said, no, just reflect back what you hear the other person say till they feel heard, and you'll have a chance to be heard. And then, I kept them on track. And after half an hour, they were talking about gun violence. And at the end, they hugged, So you have that sense of connection. And that foundation of that connection is the foundation for, well, what do we do now? Right? It's like, what's the steps? And then you also negotiate through empathy. Like you need that empathy to sort of negotiate the next steps together. And it's sort of this ongoing negotiation. So, yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, if I'm hearing you right, it's almost like, since we're talking about politics and this political sphere and whatnot, it's almost like you're kind of disarming the animosity that is baked into the disagreements already, where kind of like what we were talking about, where, if you're not with us, you're against us mentality. Instead, it's establishing that, like, hey, we're all on the same team. We just may have different ideas about how to go about this.
Yeah, and and I think the empathy itself is a unifying factor, right? It's like, okay, we have different ideas. You have different ideas about empathy than I do, but I come and let's get together and talk about it. Let me empathize and hear what your views are. And, you were kind enough to, take me up on it. And, we have this discussion. And it's the same thing with, and we could scale it up. Talked about scaling it up. Could we scale it up to, when, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump, and, Mike Pence were in the Oval Office they had that meeting, remember, with the cameras?
Yeah.
Can you imagine if they had done an empathy circle, right? That's how I see scaling it up, that we need to get the leaders, get leaders, the different, political tribes, as well as the political leaders together to have these dialogues and have them recorded like we're doing here,
Yeah, I only express skepticism, not necessarily with your intent or with your, your mission or vision, however you want to phrase it. I express skepticism with them, where they already make so much money off distrust and having distrust in each other, and they get such a quick return. Kind of like I was talking about earlier with that impatience, where with the news cycle, we see something really shocking and we want to act on it immediately. They get such an immediate return from attacking each other and making each other into boogeymen, whether they're communists or racists or whatever, that it's really hard to do that brain rewiring, and I don't know how to go about it. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? I plead ignorance on that case, you know, but it just right now I almost feel like it needs to come to a head in some way where we realize that it has gone too far before we look at a more, you know, passive route, or a more open-minded route, I should say. And I don't know what it's going to look like coming to a head. It could be, I mean, it could be Trump getting reelected. It could be, you know, literal physical violence, even though I know you've been around situations where that's happened. Uh, it just feels like it hasn't reached that critical point right yet. And I don't know. I'm skeptical about them being open to a less hostile route right now. And that's why I feel bad, because I feel like we're all getting taken for a ride, and some of our wiring as people is getting taken for a ride. Well, specifically, you know, related to this conversation, our empathy muscles and how we relate to one another and how we can look at one another. It's being used. It's being used like everything else as a, you know, a line in the sand, instead of as a natural human emotion that's supposed to bring us closer together. And that's the messed up part about this all.
Yeah, so you're saying it's pretty messed up that in the political situation that the politicians or the pundits are using that animosity for their own self-benefit, for maybe their own publicity, for all their own importance. And you just don't see them kind of switching from that. You see it's kind of hopeless to get them out of that that dynamic. And the whole thing is going to just have to blow up, you know, in some way, kind of come to a peak before people are kind of open to considering other directions.
Well, related to the example you brought up with Freets, you know what I mean? You needed your sister-in-law and your mom to blow up at each other before they could come around to the way that you were approaching things. You know what I mean? Before you could kind of de-escalate the situation from there. But that release hasn't been there. Right now, I feel like it's all still building up and building up. And like I said, I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be an actual civil war like some people are saying. I mean, we're definitely having a cultural civil war of sorts, you know, but whatever that critical point is, we'll all know when it hits, you know, but right now it hasn't yet. And we can't look at each other and say, damn, this, you know, so I don't know if they're swearing aloud on this, but, you know, damn, this shit is going way too far. All right. You know, we need to scale it back because we've gotten out of hand. All right. And sorry, maybe a bit of a side topic, but the totally thing I hate most about this is that they're treating it like a reality show. You know what I mean? They're treating us like extras in their own TV show. You know, and I know a lot of people knock Donald Trump for that as well, but I was like, man, Barack Obama was on a lot of late night TV as well. You know what I mean? That guy was hanging out with Jay-Z and whatnot. Like, he was doing a lot of that pop culture stuff as well. So it's become so unserious that they're doing anything they can to maintain power. And I think the easiest route to do that is to kind of play on our lizard brain and turn us against each other. And the only way our lizard brain will kind of snap out of it is, like I said, if, you know, we're smacked on the nose hard enough that we're like, oh shit, we gotta chill out now. All right, we've gone too far in this simulation.
We sound a little bit hopeless, like it's hopeless that the society, the culture is going to kind of shift until there's sort of a real big shock to the system, that it's just everybody's sort of playing this game, you know, the lizard brain is usually applied to fear, right? It's like kind of getting to fear, and so kind of hopeless that there's any, or you're not seeing any sort of routes to solve the problem.
Nah, I just, you know, like I said, I feel like we're going to need to feel the whiplash to really want to come around to being more understanding to each other. Because right now, I don't know. I mean, I really don't think politics is that serious of a deal. You know what I mean? Like I said, I think we all live great, great lives. And I wish we could realize that more, you know, because we're so blessed to be Americans, you know. And there's no gratitude, you know, there's no gratitude for where we are. And I think once you're a bit more grateful for how good we have it, then you start to realize, okay, I want to make sure this stays afloat. You know what I mean? I don't want to sink this ship just yet. But right now, we can't even think about being gratuity, I guess is the word. But, you know, we're just so focused on, you know, that our happiness, the block to our happiness, you know, is this other over there, and we need to do whatever we can to remove them from the situation. And like I said, I feel like that, removal process is going to take a dark turn eventually. And I don't know when. It's already gotten darker and darker, but, I feel like there's a little pitch blackness coming around the corner eventually.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you have a little bit of hope and gratitude, that if you can have shared gratitude, that for what you do have, that might be kind of one.
Oh yeah, for
route.
sure.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of this, I mean, some of these things have to do with like us not being as religious and whatnot, because religion preaches gratitude, but and whatnot. I'm not saying I'm the most godly guy out there. I'm not gonna ever say that. I'm a believer. And I believe in the Word of God, and how being grateful for what you have in life is the most important thing, no matter what situation. Because I mean, we're only given one life, and people are treating everything so cavalierly that it's kind of, I just feel like eventually, I don't know, we're gonna go down the hill too fast on our bike and crash real hard. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not it's not going to be pretty, but I do think we'll come out of it. I think we'll come out of it. We just all kind of need to experience that collective pain.
So like you got to hit rock bottom, sort of. So
Yeah.
It's like the alcoholic. You got to sort of hit that bottom, and then you're sort of open to some kind of change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Well, that's actually, see, that's why I like to, talk about the empathy part, because you're sort of, what you're doing, you're dismissing empathy as a route, right? There's sort of a criticism of empathy. And I really see empathy as the means out of this, emotional black hole of conflict and fear that we're, moving, ever deeper into. So that's my concern, is if there's sort of a misunderstanding of the depth of the nature of empathy, which there's so much misunderstanding, I think, of it, that, it's kind of adding to the problem, right? It's, for example, you referenced, Fritz Breithout, or anyway, his book, about the dark side of empathy. And, we had a discussion. He has 5 major points. And one of them is that if you empathize, you'll take one side or the other, right? And fundamentally, I think that there's a problem there, that he's not seeing the culture of empathy, reading the empathy level in the system. So again, it's like empathizing with both sides and supporting both sides and empathizing with each other. So it takes, a certain presence to be able to empathize with people you disagree to. You not get upset about it, and then also it takes another level to sort of mediate between the sides. And then there's a third level, I would say, is to get everyone to sort of value that that culture of empathy, that it becomes a shared value, that whatever problem comes up, we're going to have this empathic dialogue to understand, first to understand what the issue is, to find that common humanity, and then to come up with creative ideas that are next steps, for moving forward, which is sort of the essence of democracy, right? That we can understand each other, and that we can take, shared action together. So, so that's the essence there. That's my concern about articles like yours, is it's, kind of being critical, and, that stuff gets out there. Fritz's stuff gets out there. Paul Bloom's book gets out there. You reference those 2 books. Yeah. And Paul Bloom won't talk to me. I mean, I've tried 5 years to have a discussion like this with Paul Bloom. He will not talk. We've talked via email, but he will not talk one-to-one in a recorded session. And there's issues like his criticism of empathy is, again, that if you're totally angry, like, right, you're like raving, angry, I'm totally mad, and then I come and listen to you, and then I identify, have that state matching, I get totally angry, that he calls that empathy. And that's, again, a block to empathy. So the criticisms I see you and Fritz and Paul are not criticizing empathy itself, but the things that block that empathic connection. So yeah, and so I have concerns about that. You're kind of adding to the problem instead of, you know, sort of unraveling it and kind of healing it.
Well, I think a general problem with our culture as well is that, kind of like you were talking, I mean, you just gave me a deep dive into your thinking, you know what I mean? But because there's so much information now, and maybe Freets and Paul are a bit defensive of theirs because it's making them money. I mean, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
You know, because we're, like I said, we're so bombarded by information as well. And a lot of that stuff is a lot of negative information, but even a lot of it is just enlightening. You know, we're learning so much every day that the world has become, we're realizing more and more how complex it is. And I think it's kind of freaking us out because every little thing has, you know, nuances to it that we just weren't expecting. And to be able to really understand a topic that could be, you know, changed within a week, you know, or your understanding of it could be changed within a week, I think is intimidating to people. And that's why I feel like, you know, in our political realms, they seize on the simplicity of the situation and they want to keep us kind of grounded at a shallow level. You know, they don't want us to look too deeply into things. And that's why sorry, just had to clear something up, but that's why I worry about people gaining that, you know, empathic understanding of one another, because that depth that the conversation would bring about, I think there is a real hunger for it. You know, people crave it, but they're also intimidated by it.
Mm-hmm.
It would require them to expand their brain in a way and make them uncomfortable. You know, I mean, and people hate discomfort. I mean, if there's another thing, sorry, I know I'm making a bunch of vague cultural critiques.
No, it's totally, you're saying that it's very clear. I mean, well, what I'm hearing is that people want to stay at the surface level and they don't want to go deeper. You know, to have these dialogues that go deep, it might challenge some of their beliefs. And if you're challenging some of your beliefs, you'll have to change. And that might be scary, you know, to have that deeper.
Yeah, exactly.
And you might even kind of tap into the feelings of pain, like the pain that people have been suppressing. I imagine that's why you maybe reference pain, is that pain is going to come to the surface.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, I don't want to feel that. I'd rather kind of be distracted or something, or go criticize somebody else.
And we have so much that can distract us. You know, we have so many things that can stop pain, literally with opioids, you know what I mean? And, you know, kind of just materially by, you know, absorbing ourselves in social media and whatnot, in our online image, or, you know, consumerism, buying clothes all the time, you know, anything like that, or drugs. I mean, weed is legal now, you know, practically. You know, you can take that and it's this almost disassociation from who you really are. You know, our culture doesn't really, I don't want to say incentivize, but doesn't encourage really exploring the self. You know, it wants to keep us, like you mentioned, on that surface level. That way, we're very malleable. You know what I mean? We don't stand for much. And because we've already conceded that we're intimidated by the complexity of the situations. And that's just why I really feel like it's going to take something, you know, that's going to rock the surface, you know what I mean, and realize that that surface isn't as stable, where people will come around to your vision of things. And that's just my take, obviously. You know what I mean? I could be dead ass wrong, all right, but that's just my take, and that's how I see it, because people, they don't want to take that leap, you know what I mean, or they don't want to take that plunge into who they are, because I mean, a lot of people don't know who they are, you know, and finding out that they may not be who they think they were or think they are, it's a scary thing. You know, I don't know if they feel they all have the tools to rebuild themselves. And it's, you know, I guess I don't really empathize with them, you know what I mean? Because I've had some scary self-confrontations with myself to be able to grow, you know what I mean? But that's the key word, is that when you do look into who you are and critically examine yourself, you know what I mean? Critically examine your beliefs or the tribe or whoever you associate with, you will grow from it. And growth isn't always fun, but I mean, it's necessary. And we do need to have a growth into a better place. Right now, we're a little too superficial, I guess is the way to put it. But yeah.
Well, yeah. So I do hear that it's like the growth, going deeper into yourself, looking at your different values and experiences that you kind of going deeper. And it sounds like you've had some experiences with that too. Some maybe challenging experiences, but you do see the growth potential, for that too. And I would totally agree. But I would say that empathy is the mechanism for that, because it's through the empathic dialogue and being able to safely express yourself, in a non-judgmental way, that you can, say whatever you want, be who you want, express that and be heard by others in an accepting way, in an empathic way. That creates a space, a way to go into those experiences. It creates a sense of safety, and it also creates a sense of connection with others. So the empathy is seems like to me is the total means for doing that, that going deeper and having that growth in a positive way. And then also to sort of spread that. So for me, it's like, well, how do we spread that? And one way that I've been looking at is, can we get more high-profile people to do these empathy circles? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you're in Washington, D.C., do you have connections like with any of people from the different tribes? And we can hold some empathy circles, it's like bring them together, and we can sort of mediate and, do some recorded empathy circles to, model these dialogues.
Well, I hate to disappoint you, but I'm a nobody around here. All right, so I'm no good in that aspect. I could get you the store clerk, but I couldn't get you anyone of import.
Okay.
But no, you're totally right though, where you do need high-profile people to buy in, and that's where maybe I would say like a religious leader of some sort, since they would seem like a natural person to put in there, or a humanitarian of any kind, but that I don't think politicians are going to come around to it, just because, like we've been talking about, they're really incentivized to keep people in that very short-term frame of mindset and that superficial mindset where they want to feel like they're the one holding out the carrot, They don't want to feel like we're in control of our own destiny. And it's saddening, honestly. But that's
yeah. Well, I'm a little more hopeful because I see this. I'm in this world. So I have done an empathy, we call it empathy forum at UC Berkeley, where we had candidates. There was 12 candidates running for our state assembly. I was able to bring 11 of them together into what we call the empathy forum. And we did 2 empathy circles, with 2 groups of them for about an hour each. And they were using empathic listening with each other. And so we were able to do that. I've talked to the governor a couple of times, about having an empathy circle. He keeps trying to avoid it, like you're saying. He doesn't. But I'm ready to set up our empathy tent on the Capitol lawn and say we're not leaving until you have an empathy circle with the Republicans, right? With Gavin Newsom. And I've talked to our congressmen and other. So I've really been kind of working at kind of getting this, and also for sort of a social action that we can come to Washington D.C., set up on the Capitol, the mall, and with our empathy tent, we're going to say, you aren't talking to each other empathically. We're here until you have an empathy circle with each other across the aisle. So we're kind of gearing up for this social, more of an assertive empathy. And, and it's not just the politicians, but the different, you mentioned the social justice, the identity politics. Get some of those identity politics folks and the right, and have them, talk to each other. And I've done that. We've had, when they came, the right wing came to San Francisco after Charlottesville. All San Francisco was in uproar, and I reached out to the leader on the right, and then also got one of the counter demonstration people, and we had an empathy circle. So if you're interested, I'd love to do kind of follow up. We actually do an empathy circle if you want to bring in some, not just politicians, but it can be, anyone on these different sides. You can say you'll write an article about it or something like that. So it can be any kind of cross-party, cross-tribe, folks.
Yeah, a good person for you to reach out to. I don't know his name off the top of my head, but I think it's Daryl Davis, the guy who's targeted like 200 white supremacists or whatnot. I mean, that guy. I mean, that sounds like the icon of empathics. I'm sorry, listening and healing. I mean, if you can take people who seem to have hate ingrained in them, and kind of pry that seed out, that seems like a superstar candidate right there.
Yeah. Well, if you want to do that, we'll reach out to him and we'll do an empathy circle. You can say you're going to write an article about it. We'll get him, a white supremacist, and maybe a social justice warrior. Maybe Black Lives Matter. One of the leadership. Because I've seen him, Daryl, and I don't know if you saw his documentary, but he was really good at listening to the white supremacists. But when he got together with some, other Black activists, they were like cats and dogs. He could not empathically dialogue with them very well. So it was kind of interesting. So, yeah. But anyway, to get those different folks together would be, to actually, I think, to model these dialogues is what we've been trying to do.
Well, it sounds super honorable, Edwin. All right. And more power to you. Let me know any way I can support you.
Okay. Do you want to try to organize that together? Do you want to reach out to him? And as a journalist, you can make the case that you're writing an article and that so we have you, Daryl Davis, Black Lives Matter, and then a white supremacist doing an online empathy circle, and we record it, just online, and I think it'll be.
I'll reach out to him.
Okay, then I'll send you the info on how the empathy circle works and some samples of it, and it's usually for like at least 2 hours. And then we have sort of this structured dialogue, and we just do like in Zoom and record it. And okay, well, good. Yeah. Well, that's exciting. We got an action item too.
All right, yeah, I'll be in touch about that. All right.
Okay. Well, this is delightful. Talking to you. Really appreciate you taking the time and sharing. Your views on this, and we'll follow up and do that empathy circle. So.
All right, Edwin. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.